I'm here live with Jim Ruff from the Centre of Wise Democracy. Yeah, would you like to introduce yourself, Jim? I don't know what to say in your intro. Maybe.
Yeah, so I'm just...
I've never done that. It doesn't like Firefox. Huh, now that's happening. That's,
okay.
Okay, that should be.
Is there an echo too?
It's playing me twice, once on Zoom and once on Facebook, but I've just muted.
Oh, you muted. Okay, good. Yeah. So, well, I was a business consultant, and I had the opportunity to experiment in a large system of people that became my laboratory. It was actually also called a sawmill. And I was interested in the prospect of helping people to release their creativity on impossible to solve problems and solve impossible to solve problems. That was sort of my starting place. And I attended many years the Creative Problem Solving Institute in Buffalo, New York, and I was on the faculty for many years. But you know, that was my quest, is to find a way to solve really, really difficult, impossible seeming problems, and to use what I was learning in the sawmill so that productivity would soar and quality would soar and people would like one another, and you know, all kinds of wonderful things happened. And that worked. It worked, but it was terrifying to management in one sense. I mean, I was I'm not going to go too long. I guess I should stop. But anyway, that's what started me, is finding what I call the quality of thinking that's needed, is what I call choice creating, which is quite different than problem solving or creative problem solving or decision making or whatever. It's a heartfelt creative process, and where the emotions are included. They're part of the process, and unlike brainstorming, for instance. And so there's this quality of thinking that's needed. And then I developed dynamic facilitation, which is how to elicit that quality of thinking in a reliable way. And so in the practice of it, people would, I mean, I taught seminars on this, and people would practice on societal problems. They would form small groups, and since they were from different parts of the country or even the world, they didn't share a lot of, you know, business problems, but they would share societal problems. And so then I got interested in the solutions that they're coming up with, because I was holding this basket of breakthroughs, and all the people were leaving, you know, and there I was with this, my God, this is incredible. And so that's kind of what's happened for me, is that, so it's gone from a quality of thinking, choice creating, to dynamic facilitation, now to wisdom council process. How do we do this quality of thinking in large systems? And then how do we do it for society? And that means affecting all these big issues like climate change and species extinction, etc.
Yeah, I think I really love your sawmill story. And I think that's one thing I really like about you, is I feel like you arrived at the same place as I did, but from like a completely different direction. But then I didn't have a solution, and you've been working on the solution. So I really like that. I'm really curious why it was your quest, like what got you started.
Well, I mean, there's many starting points, but one of the starting points was just, I was going to go to this conference on creative problem solving for solving impossible to solve problems, but they weren't really working on anything that mattered. And that was really upsetting to me. I wondered, you know, brainstorming doesn't really deal with big issues. It does fine for marketing problems or inventing new products, or, you know, stuff inside the system that's not very that's impossible maybe, but it's more like a puzzle. It's not really dealing with some monster issue. So so I began to think, well, wait a minute, this can't be all there is. I mean, the creativity really exists. And then I began to, and then I had this, I mean, I had a lot of threads in my background. One was Jungian psychology. I was learning a lot about that. And another was the quality movement was happening at the time. So I could go to management and say, hey, I can, by helping the employees orient toward solving their problems, they will raise the level of quality and productivity, both.
Right.
And
This
I can pretty
isn't
much guarantee that.
this isn't their personal problems. It's like their work problems.
Yes, but personal problems came into it. But yes, I didn't sell it that way. I sold it on. But I told them, and I told the employees that this is about you or your problems. In other words, to the employees, I would say, you know, they would say, well, I don't want to solve this. This is ridiculous. I said, well, no, don't solve anything you don't want to solve. You know, just work on problems. These are your problems. You have the opportunity, if you want, to work on problems of your choice and to be paid while you're doing it. So pretty good deal, really. And I'm here to help you solve those problems. And so I would facilitate. And, you know, in the process, I got better and better at developing this process I call dynamic facilitation.
Right. And that's really the key to this process, right? It's the facilitator.
It really is. I mean, yeah, because, you know, most people are walking around trying to solve these impossible to solve problems without a thinking process that can solve. They're trying to get more rational. They're trying to be rational to solve these big problems.
Why does that make you laugh?
Well, because to be rational is to be in the system. You're trying to use logic instead of creativity to solve something that's impossible. And logic will take you, you know, only, you know, it can't do it. It's not a possibility. So you have to at some point come into this creative thinking, and it has to be a certain kind of creative thinking where it isn't just, see what happens in most things, and this is really what was happening at the Creative Problem Solving Institute, is that people would deal with brainstorming, for instance. In that case, you brainstorm lots of possibilities, but then you switch back to your judging mind and you try and pick one, you know, you select one. Well, that means the judging mind is really superior in all this. And, you know, so you don't actually identify the real problem in brainstorming. You just are given a problem framework, and then you stay in that framework the whole time trying to come up with options inside that framework.
And then we choose an option rather than.
And then we choose an option. Well, we don't choose it. We decide on an option. To me, I distinguish between deciding and choosing, two worlds. But yes, deciding is judgment process.
Yeah, I know you hate the word decide.
No, I just want to have it be used. You know, I don't want people to think that we're creating the choice. We're not making the decision. And so I want to make sure we realize that we're not making the decision, because we're not using any of those brain cells that you would use if you were to make a decision. We're using an entirely different mentality.
So is that the crux then? You're helping people create a more creative choice.
Yes, I'm helping people stay in the mind frame, which they don't maybe notice, you know, where we can face these impossible seeming problems and have breakthroughs and shifts. And then at some point, especially if you have an ongoing series of meetings, at some point, people just look at one another and go, oh yeah, we're not even working on the same problem. This is the problem we need to work on. And this is bigger and better. And we know how to solve that. And we have a strategy going forward. And they don't give themselves credit, though, for solving an impossible to solve problem. what you have to do is help them. You have to bring out those first charts and say, hey, look, here's where you started. Remember, you thought this was impossible.
Right.
You can't, you're not in a position to change the management system. Okay. You're not in a position to fix that, but somehow you are, and you're fixing it. So how did that happen?
Right. Yeah, I've just been in your seminar, and we met a few years ago, and I kind of, well, I personally can never stop thinking about both the climate problem and then also this left versus right entrenchment that's happening.
In the national situation, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean it's also happening in Britain where I'm from. And just to me, it seems like we oftentimes just focus on solving a symptom.
Yes.
Rather than getting to the root of it. And I feel like that's entrenched in our democratic systems. And it sounds like you also recognize it's sort of entrenched in the way we think.
Yes, except I think what's happened, yes, our system, both in the UK and in the US, is about special interests competing in governance and in economics and everywhere. I mean, that's the whole idea, is that we have this competitive context, which only works if we're independent. But what's happened is we've become interdependent. And so that whole system, what we call democracy, really can't work anymore. Capitalism and democracy, those are the two pieces. And then there's the old system of the authoritarian structure, the autocracy. So it used to be there was a division within everybody. Both parties were democratic, certainly, and then they would be oppositional in that. Now we've had a change. Now one of the parties is actually advocating an autocratic system, and the other party's advocating, staying with democracy, or what we call democracy. It's really gotten weird. I mean, but the answer is they can only see those two possibilities. And there's a whole third possibility. If you introduce choice creating and the wisdom council process and dynamic facilitation, now we have the capability to go to the system that we all really actually want, which is, where we're all equal and we're in the choosing conversation. I don't want to say decision-making conversation. We're all in the essential conversation, and we're co-creating answers together and knowing and providing responsible leadership to the elected officials and official decision makers and things like that. I mean, it should be the people, or we the people, coming together in that way. So I talk about the triangle and the box and the circle as three underlying structures for how a society can work. And I don't think the triangle can work, to go back to the autocracy, where everybody ignores what truth is and just is loyal to whatever the leader says. I mean, that's getting ridiculous. And then there's the scientific, rational, here are the rules of the game, now compete. We'll just imagine that everything will work out great. It's not working out great. We can't do it that way anymore.
Right.
So we're having this battle between the box and the triangle. And I'm saying, no, if we have these basic understandings, we can go to the circle system. And then that's where we're all collaborating and co-creating our version of truth, our version of our shared vision of what we want, and our strategy for going forward. So
can I just explain those three, and you jump in if I do it poorly. So the triangle, that's basically like the old system we had, which was autocratic and essentially came from lending our allegiance to the king. So we lend our allegiance higher up the hierarchy. That's the triangle. and I think I've heard you say this before, that Trump was an effort to kind of return us to that. And I think I find Trump a very interesting character. Um, Partly, I think, because he's so expressive, and I think he's responding to something we can all feel, which is this isn't working anymore. But then his attempt is to go backwards because we haven't imagined what going forward looks like. You're the only person, apart from like all the spiritual hippies of like, we need to do ayahuasca and come to collective consciousness. I feel like you have an actual like grounded physical way to get there.
Yeah.
But anyway, and then the box is, well, I've heard you say the rules of the game, but essentially like we've enshrined these rules in the square piece of paper, the constitution or law. We don't have a constitution in Britain, but we've enshrined the rules of the system, and then everyone is playing inside that game, and that is where you have this combative system. Like we enshrined, well, decision making essentially, and
Yes.
argument, and
Yes.
competition.
Yes.
And I think that's got to an extreme where that battle process is actually driving people further apart into those camps, which in my mind is in the media and in the public discourse, neither side is feeling listened to, which essentially causes them to entrench and to separate until they're listened to.
Yeah, but who's the listener?
Right.
There's no listener.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, just the other side, and they're not going to listen.
Right.
So there's no we the people, or there is no public interest.
Right.
There's only special interests, and then we're surprised that the public interest suffers. It's like, oh yeah, what's the matter with these people? Why don't they think about the public interest? Well, the system is structured so to help them not do that.
Yeah, I saw someone had done a study to see how responsive the US government is to political, like the opinion of the people, essentially.
Yeah.
And I've never seen anything like it. It was 0 for the people and 1 for special interests. And
yeah.
And as a scientist, like you never see either of those. Well, sometimes 0 if you're like, what's the effect of this table on the climate? Yeah. Like that would be a 0. But
there is no real voice of the people. What they do is they do a survey and sample these individuals, and they say, oh, here's what the people would, really want. But then there's no voice of the people to do that, or to enforce that, or to manage that to happen. So they just sample in there and make an assessment. And what we're talking about is setting up an agency of we the people that can actually manage the system and move forward and take response. Because we the people, we already have the real authority for any of these systems is really all of the people saying, hey, yeah, let's do this.
Right.
I mean, okay, let's have a king. Okay, great, let's do that. And then everybody gets into the king thing and is all loyal and loyalty, and then the king lies, and there's no truth coming down, and then there's no truth going up because nobody's going to tell them the truth. Like that's what's happening with Putin right now, and nobody can tell him the truth. So, but that's a system, and somehow or other that got established, but there wasn't any conscious we the people that said, yeah, let's try that. But there was a moment, I think, when we went from the triangle to the box, where there really was a moment of, hey, let's try this new system. And it was near unity in making that choice. for at least, okay, I have a lot of caveats because there was no blacks and no women and no Native Americans and, you know, et cetera, but no non-property holders even. But it was an amazing thing to try and consciously say, hey, let's try a new system. And what we're proposing is just a few of us facilitating a new conversation, so that people just find them. We don't touch the system, but it turns out there's a new conversation happening that everybody's involved in, hopefully, if we can engineer that. And it's at this high level choice creating, so that we're facing the monster issues that we have. And we're working them through in a way that everybody says, yeah, that's what's going on. That's what we need to, that's what we need to do to fix this.
Right. And this is going from the square to the circle.
To the square to the circle. And it's easier than having everybody look at what we're doing and saying, yes, let's try this. We don't have to do that. Just a few of us need to start facilitating the new whole system conversation, which is actually a structural adjustment. In other words, you're adding to the existing system now a level of consciousness, not global consciousness, like everybody has a new understanding and is in touch with the, you know, the we consciousness or whatever.
Right.
But no, it's a real global consciousness where there's a we that can act, has agency. And then you essentially have a new form of global governance without ever setting it up.
And really the key thing here is to facilitate people in this way, which actually creates a better conversation. So instead of people being in there, like the idea that I have to solve the problems,
yeah,
we get lifted out and we come at it as a group. And then the idea is that has ripple down effects by simply improving the conversation. Is that right?
Yeah, because our current conversation doesn't really take new ideas. I mean, if you have an idea out of the box, there's no place for it.
Right.
There's just, it doesn't belong. There's no, you know, the elected leaders can't lead. They don't do
right.
leading.
There's no one even working on it.
Yeah, there's no leading. They're just out there to get reelected, whatever, and there's no leadership really to speak of. So if you have a breakthrough strategy, and this is what I discovered, see, when I had this insight in 1993, I got on a plane, I flew to Washington, D.C. and started trying to talk to people. And I got it. There's nobody there that can hear. They can't do it. You know, if they start leading in this new direction, they won't get reelected. So they're not going to be even in interest. They're only interested in, you know, ideas that will, you know, poll well. And this one, a new idea can't do that. So, but fortunately, through about 30 years of working on this, we realized that we can just do it. We don't need their permission.
Right.
We can just, if you and I somehow find our facilitative footing enough that everybody is in one conversation and it's a high quality conversation, well, then we've done it. I mean, that's a structural change. Now there is kind of a we the people, but we didn't have to enact it through the existing system. We just can set it up.
Right.
And you know, some money is needed to do that, and some connections and some media support. I mean, there's stuff that needs to happen, but I think it's a slam dunk actually, because everybody is just questing after that conversation. We're all looking at one another going, how come we can't just talk about this stuff? How come we can't face these problems and work together, you know? Well, okay, we can help that to happen.
Do you find, so I was just in your seminar and we got to write down an impossible to solve problem that we'd like to solve. And really they were big, right? The things, even the small things that people wrote were actually quite big things. They might have written a thing that's quite contained and local, but the actual like issue was big. And then some of them were huge. Like the one I wrote down was how to solve climate change. And then the group I ended up in was how to bring about ecological justice.
Yes.
And I was kind of wondering, like, when you do this with people, do they always write down these huge issues?
Well, usually what happens is that they write when they write a smaller issue, often. Well, like you did, your issue got bigger too.
Yeah.
How to solve climate change. Whoops, now we're gonna have to do ecological justice. I mean, that's bigger,
Right.
more nebulous, more harder. And yet, when you have breakthroughs or shifts to get to those bigger problems, a strange thing happens. Everybody feels more empowered to solve it.
Yeah, that's weird. It's so counterintuitive.
Yeah, when the problem, see, the kind of thinking that we have been left with as our system facilitates us to think reductively. So we don't even try the big problems. Nobody's actually working on the big ones hardly, except in the market, but nobody, and so they try and say, well, we can't really solve that whole thing, so we'll just deal with carbon dioxide out of transportation, and we'll just deal with the cruise ships, and
right, which is reductive.
Yeah, it's all reductive. We break it all into little pieces and say, okay, you work on that piece, we'll work on this piece, but the trouble is that none of those, if you add all those pieces up, it isn't actually solving the problem. They're not really dealing with it.
Right.
And even now with, we're discovering is all these renewable energy sources aren't really very renewable, and they really aren't going to offer that much. So,
right.
And it turns out that the system took over. It's really about making money for the special interests again,
Right. I feel like this with renewable energy, so we have a climate problem, but really underneath that, well, we have a lot of things underneath that, but one thing is we have an ecological problem. And one problem we have is the system has enshrined a type of thinking which isn't considering the ecological layer.
Yes.
And then when if people try and address climate change by putting up solar panels, really what they're doing is addressing the energy issue inside of it, but without changing that lack of ecological thinking. And actually, at best, all that does is shunt I feel like this is an ecologist, the way we come at what society does, to my mind, is shunt ecological costs into the future. So putting up solar panels, you might solve the energy problem, but you're still shunting that ecological cost into the future, like the cost of mining and the cost of renewing the panels.
Right. And there's nobody there to say, are we okay? I mean, there's no manager managing a solution to the problem. There's just trying to make money now through solar panels. That's our system. And I mean, you as an individual saying, oh yeah, I'm contributing. I mean, it's like everybody, we're doing our part, I mean, there's no holistic addressing the problem. And in fact, whenever a scientist goes in a corner and adds up the numbers, they go, oh, they come back all depressed because it isn't doing the job.
Right.
So, but there is a quality of thinking, and there is this potential, all of us together doing that quality of thinking and managing the problem. In other words, if all of us somehow could step back out of the old system, and just say, look, hey, are we okay with this trashing the planet? What kind of information do we have? Do you want to, do we want to set up a plan? I mean, and of course, I think when you really look at it, you begin to realize that it's about overshoot and the fact that we're consuming the planet a whole lot faster than can replenish. So we're about, I don't know what we are, 8 billion people, something. And I just saw a paper that said our planet can hold 1 billion. So, so at some level, there's this coming together and saying, how do we do that? How do we come down to 1 billion? And of course, our system has us trying to grow, have more babies, get more immigration, grow, we got economic growth. And obviously that has to turn around. We can't do that.
Right, and growth is synonymous with growth is just synonymous with consumption. So
yeah.
we can't grow our way out of an ecological problem.
No. So
unless we plant a load of trees, but
so there has to be a coming together, a collective intelligence, looking at the problem, the impossible seeming problem, and having breakthroughs and shifts and coming up with an answer that all of us can go yes to. And then we're providing the leadership. We, the people, are providing leadership to governments, to the national governments, and setting up some. I mean, already there is a form of global governance, but we would also set up some way to manage the commons. And there's lots of commons: the fish, the fresh water, the atmosphere, blah blah blah. So how do we manage the commons in a way that all of us are supporting this rather than resisting? If government tries to do it, I mean, everybody's going to get all upset. And we're going to have a fight again, and the pendulum's going to swing back and forth, and the problem won't get solved. We're going to just be upset that government's stepping in and making regulations, and yeah, they shouldn't be. There should be we the people creating a strategy and getting government to help us implement it.
Right. Oh God, I wish we could just make this happen now, but
it's not that far off. I don't think it's not that far off. But I mean, I'm not the man to do it. We've got to get some organizing type people. But if we had one of these, we just need one billionaire to come along with us. Right. I think we could just set it up.
This is what I want to do in LA.
Yeah.
And I'm not one of these people either. So I have the same struggle as you, but I'm really, God, I would love to do that climate.
Well, I think people are desperate, and the conversation is missing. We just don't have it. And if I think people are dying they just are desperate. They want to be in the conversation about what we're doing and having their views and figuring things out and coming up with something that's intelligent, collectively intelligent. And an action, it can drive governments and the marketplace. It's a different economic system too, of course. It's a different system of economics, of governance, just adding an intelligence messes up the old rules of the game thing. Because now it's like playing basketball, except we stop the game and have a real life outside of the game. I mean, in our current world, we don't have, there's no real life. There's just the game.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll just tell you a few things I'd love to hear. One is the mill story. I really love how this came out of honest working people. It was trying to solve their problems. Actually, maybe you can just tell us that story. I feel like one thing I really trust is people, which I feel like you do too. And I feel like I trust them because I've worked in a lot of situations with people who I don't necessarily even like, and I don't necessarily agree with them politically, or it's a mixture of people I like, people I don't like, people I agree with politically, people I don't, people who I think have good solutions, people I think have bad, but we've all been working on like a collective mission. And I feel like whenever we come together around a collective mission, none of those things matter. And people have brilliant solutions and a lot of information, like everyone's had this different life and all the information gathered from that. And yeah, I used to work on expeditions, and I feel like there, whenever something went wrong, it was so easy to fix because we just thought we could.
Yeah.
And we just trusted everyone to sort of say their piece and figure something out. And some of those were impossible. So I like how it came out of the mill and how trusting of people it is. Like you don't necessarily go and get an expert, or an expert, you like use the regular people.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I don't know, 25 years after I left, or 30 years maybe, I don't remember, but I have a video on the, I don't know, did you see that about the, oh, okay, yeah, because I'm talking to the mill manager and my boss and whatever, and they're just kind of remembering. But yeah, I was saying to management that, and the real deal with management is that they were spending all their time in the union meetings, which were highly conflicted. And so they said to me, Jim, we just want people to feel better about their jobs. So just go do that. Well, so that's a pretty low bar. I mean, I wanted to have them work on impossible to solve problems and make headway. So, but I had a lot of leeway because they just wanted to get out of those damn meetings, really. And so what I did is I said, look, if the group, and I was assuming this was true, that if the group took an hour a week, and I only did it in one group in night shift, one group in day shift. And I said, if they just take an hour a week and work on the most important issues and do it in a creative way, you will see productivity and quality go up, even if they don't come up with anything. And of course, they will come up with stuff. But, and it really bore true. It really was true. Just the fact that these people would come, you know, I don't know if I have this story about the lunch pails. You know, when I first started the meetings, people would come in and they plop their lunch pail down, fold their arms and sit behind the lunch pails. Okay, I'm here, you know, go ahead, whatever, you know, they're paying me, here I am. And so I would start saying, well, let's get a list of some problems you'd like that you have, because we're solving your problems. We're not solving management problems. What are your problems? And so I'd get a list, and in both groups, it was the foreman. They wanted to fire the foreman. That's the impossible to solve problem. The night shift, day shift, fire the foreman, different guy. So they would work on it, and gradually the lunch pails would move aside and you'd go on the floor, you know, whatever. One new guy comes into the room, puts his lunch pail down, goes like this. Everybody else does the same thing. They're back. We're back. We're back. I called it the lunch pail effect. It's just like, wow, okay, I get it.
Like a defense, like a thing to hide behind.
Everybody's hiding. But once they get going again, then they're getting creative. And of course, when you're in this creative zone, what happened is that in both groups, they realized the foreman's not the problem. It's the system. So originally they just wanted to fire one guy and they're fixed. Everything's fixed. And now the problem got huge again. They have to change the system. But they were getting excited because they were already, because now they're working on these problems, these big problems in the mill, and making headway, like lots of wasted lumber here and there, and there's just machines getting broken, and the lubricants not being good, or just and each problem would start usually with, we have this terrible problem, we need more people. But then they get creative and they go, well, maybe if we change the way we lubricate these equipment, and they invent something, some little thing that where you just run the chain and there's little drips, and you just set this thing up and the chains go through, and all the many trains used to be that the oiler would go down each edge of the chain. He had to go each time. It took him, all evening to get all the thing. Now they just had a thing they put on the top. The oil would drip. They ran the chain all the way around. They're done. So they'd invent things and solve these impossible to solve problems. Mainly the impossible to solve problem in this case was we need to hire a new oiler. And how do we do that? Well, we didn't hire one. We created an invention that was essentially one oiler worth of time. So they hired their own oiler, but they didn't do it that way. They invented a new system, So what?
Well, I was going to ask, did their problems then change over time, or?
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. Then they'd have another problem, something. The barker would get stuck, I remember one issue was they had these huge logs, huge, and you'd have to run them in this barker where they would take the bark off, and the bark would get stuck, and so you want to cut these logs, and they had a thing that would come up so that the logs could get cut, and it would get stuck. It wouldn't go down. So this was just another example of solving an impossible to solve problem. Oh, I guess, yeah, the origin of this problem was cleanup. We need better cleanup so this stuff doesn't get stuck here and there and everywhere. They have all kinds of problems with cleanup. So we need to hire 2 more people for cleanup. Well, then they'd start working on the problem and they'd realize, that thing gets stuck. How does that, all the bark gets in there and gets stuck in there. And then they'd realize, well, maybe, is there any reason why that ledge needs to be there? So then they checked around and thought about it and worked on it, and they realized maybe we can just cut rid of that ledge, get rid of it altogether, so that the things would come down and wouldn't get bark underneath it, and eliminated.
That reminds me of being a teenager. I used to work in my summers as a baler driver. So we were baling straw, and my dad, he imported these balers from the US that worked on a very large scale. And in the US, they're naked. You can sort of see through them into all of the workings. Then in Europe, we have all these health and safety laws. So the whole thing is clad in tin, basically. Yeah. And then all of the gunk gets stuck inside it. And then the solution. So it's like a health and safety regulations that you have it, but the solution is it breaks then all the time. So you have to stop your tractor, put the handbrake on, and climb inside it. So you spend I don't know, maybe an hour a day either underneath it, hoping that your tractor stays put. And then what you did, it had this giant flywheel on the front, and that had an extra handbrake. So to keep yourself safe, you put the handbrake on for the flywheel, climbed inside it, cleared out all the gunk, got it all over you, which made you like itchy as hell. And then you also created a fire hazard because so often I got back into my tractor without taking the handbrake off.
Yeah.
I could start the tractor, drive along a bit, and you've put back on all the cladding, and then this place is getting super hot where it accumulates straw. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so that's a really good illustration of the current system of thinking, is that the decision maker isn't really involved in the thing. So they make some kind of arbitrary decision,
right,
to solve the problem, and then, you know, actually it worsens things. And if all the people that work with the equipment are part of the thinking process, well, then you get a holistic solution that everybody goes with, and you modify it as you go along and stuff. And so that's what happened. I mean, we used to get those kind of stupid things where the foreman would say, "Oh, well, this is what you do," you know, and you do it. And if you didn't do it, then, you know, you'd be in trouble. So now you've got the people who are on the machines and stuff. They're working these things through, and they're smart, and they set it all up. Like in the example, I mean, they were inventing things that were just ridiculous for, you know, $69 or something instead of the $2 million they were planning to spend. When they had the experts come in to design it, these guys would think about the whole thing and just make some minor adjustment. And so, and each time, you know, you'd have to help them realize, you have to, I tell them, grab your right hand and stick it over behind you and just pat yourself on the back, because nobody else is going to do it. And you got to realize you solved another impossible to solve problem.
Right. Yeah, $69 over 2 million is pretty good.
Well, and we did have one like that. It was like, oh my God, you know, because they were all set to hire the experts, but these employee teams would come in and they'd work it through. But they're thinking differently. They're not trying to solve the problem, but they're working on the whole mess, making sure that this is commonsensical, you know, and deal with the real problem. And that has to happen around climate change. That has to happen around species extinction. There has to be all of us involved, so that the solution can, that we're, you know, the old system, the current system we call democracy and capitalism, the motivation is to make profits. That's the motivation. You want to win the game. And when you transition to actually adding the missing conversation, then you all realize, oh, the real priority here is to make sure that we can thrive and our children have a place that can work. And what's the system that can support that? And, you know, if we have to get to 1 billion people, how are we going to do it? You know, how does that happen equitably and humanely, instead of waiting for the wars and the pestilence and stuff to do it for us, you know?
Right. Yeah, which I guess is why you call it wise democracy.
Yeah, there's a wisdom. That's right. It's a wisdom and it's democratic. And I'm thinking of inventing a term for the system, because the system's bigger than just the governance. You know, it's the economics, the culture, truth, reality, blah, 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 thinking process. So I don't know, I've been toying with the idea of calling it to-beism. In other words, there's feudalism and capitalism, and, you know, all these isms are out there, especially in the world of economics. And this is not socialism. It's not capitalism. I mean, it's capitalism plus intelligence, you know, so it's how do we, and so I don't know, the reason why I chose the name to-beism is because I already have the URL. And besides, I think I like it too, because when you know, it's like to be or not to be. I mean, we have to stop and think. Are we alive and conscious, or are we just stupid, you know, automatons just stimulus response mechanisms. That's what we've got, stimulus response. We have to stop and think.
Right, right. Yeah, that's quite a good way of describing it. I often think we try and fix things after the fact, which is like responding to the stimulus, rather than using our knowledge to identify what's coming and then switching to a different track. And I feel like that's wisdom.
Yeah, we're all on board, and we all now have a new motivation. It's not self-interest. It's oriented toward the tribe, toward surprise, the whole population. How do we make a place that can work for our future generations?
So yeah, maybe I'd like to hear a little bit about the process. I think so you have dynamic facilitation, which is the process in the room, and then you have this other part, which is what do you use that for, which is the wisdom council and creating this better conversation, which would also, the wisdom council is running the process, and then with an aspect of reflection or bringing out the message more, which I guess is some kind of media or visibility.
Yeah, so we've got some names here of different things, but I talk about choice creating as being the thinking process, and dynamic facilitation as being the process that can reliably evoke choice creating among a random group of people. Like if they're representatives, we can't deal with that very well, because these people aren't even in the room. I mean, if you're trying to talk to a representative, that person is representing somebody that isn't even there. So they're not going to be transformed. So what we do is we randomly select just a small number of people from a system of, like, globally, just be 12 to 16 people, that's all. But we do our best to get a true random selection. It doesn't matter how bad we do it. I mean, if we can do it pretty poorly, we do our best. The key is we do our best. We're really doing our best to try and get a random group. and then what we've done is we've created a symbol. It's really all of us. They're in the room, there they are. But if we've done our best to get that truly random, and we're going to do it again, we're going to do it in 2 months, we're going to do another 2 months, different group. But if we've got this group and we dynamically facilitate them, so we can get them in. We know they're not representatives, they're just real people. And so we're going to get authenticity, and we're going to be able to tackle some impossible seeming issue and reach some kind of unity through shifts and breakthroughs. That will happen. And they will walk on stage, and really there's layers of audience, but they'll have a face-to-face audience, and they'll present their results. And they present kind of the story of how they got there and the results in facing climate change or in facing whatever. And that audience, we have different ways maybe to have everybody feel a participant in this conversation. And the bar for participation is pretty easy, because if somebody says, oh, that's a pile of shit, they're in the conversation. So it's pretty easy to get them.
Yeah,
but
right. This is a pile of shit on the board.
That's right. I mean, we just want people to know what's happening and to be talking about it or commenting or whatever, as much as possible. So and then we're going to do another one, and then we're going to do another one. And what happens when the Wisdom Council presents to an audience, the first layer of audience, face to face, is pretty much people go, they turn their chairs, they talk, and you've got maybe the CEOs, and I don't know what you want. My CEOs might be a bad idea because they're kind of representatives. We want real people. We can have random people. We can have movie stars. I don't know, but some way that a larger audience will be interested in watching the response of this first group.
Right.
So the Wisdom Council speaks. The people in the room turn their chairs and talk. There's people in the larger audience, broadcast audience, and they can talk wherever. But the idea is each time we do it, presumably we'll have more and more people each time. But basically, after the Wisdom Council speaks, most people in the audience are kind of saying, yeah, that makes sense to me. I would add this piece, or I would add that, or I'm worried about this, or something. In other words, they're in the conversation, and we're holding space for choice creating like conversation, even in the broader area. So we can reliably evoke choice creating in the small group where people are not doing agree, disagree. They're not doing that. They're not doing yes, no, dualistic. They're being creative, coming up with stuff and having shifts. And we can approximate that in the larger audience too, because the group is telling their story and giving their conclusion, and then we're shaping it so that they don't say, I agree, I disagree. We don't want that. We want them to say, well, wait a minute, they forgot this. Wait a minute, what's that? In other words, they're building it, making it even better.
Right.
And that's what we're doing, is we're structuring the whole new conversation to be in this creative place of looking at the real problem and making it better. And then so then what we end up with is that the whole system is in one conversation, and the periodic wisdom councils are basically articulating the progress that we're all making together.
Right.
And these are symbolic voices of all of us each time they reach unity. Mm-hmm. And so it's a way for all of us to really finally be in the conversation. And if you, Robert Holden, are the weirdest person and you say something absolutely outrageous and you believe it, well, in the old system, we can just ignore you. Oh, he's a crackpot. In this system, we're curious. How did Robert come up with that? What's he saying?
Right.
So it's really a valuing of the diversity now, instead of dismissing it.
Right.
So just in the process, we're dealing with issues like racism, for instance, and prejudice, because we're creating a space where the diversity of people is an asset. Right.
Yeah, and bringing people together, and crucially, different people. It's not.
Yes.
It's not a bunch of politicians, and it's not a bunch of liberals, and it's not a bunch of conservatives.
Right.
Real
so the Wisdom Council process, we know it works because we've done it in organizations in different places, and especially in Austria and Germany, they're doing a lot of them. But what I call the big need is to do it for society, for globally and nationally. Nationally in the US, especially, God, we're going to collapse here pretty soon if we don't. And then globally, same thing. We have to, in my mind, start thinking collectively. We aren't thinking. We're just automatic stimulus response mechanisms in a system that's pre-programmed to self-destruct.
Right. Can you talk about the purge? You had this example earlier, which reminded me of, like, they wanted to fire the foreman. In my grief, I was just like, "Oh, fire the government." That's where I'd start. And then I was sitting next to Paul, who considered himself part of the government and had spent his life. And actually, I spent my life working for the government, really. So I was partly firing myself, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, everybody kind of walks in there with a solution. Often, usually it's a solution, not always, but where they,
right,
you tap them. You have to kind of really work sometimes to get it out. But once they lay it out there, then they're vulnerable. They've said what they, and we're holding them safe. We're keeping them safe.
right,
Criticism and judgment and stuff, and we write it out. We write out the okay, and we make them think it through. Okay, tell us, how would that work? How would that work? How would you do it? Whatever. And usually what happens is that the purge answer is like, clearly that's not going to work. Fire the government. Okay, great. Or defund the police, or it's like they jump to these things that are and rally around and have a social movement and paint the streets and everything, but it's just silliness, really. We have to have a thinking process where we come up with a real answer, and the purge answers need to be in there. They're in the mix. But there's also noticing, oh, that's not really going to work, and that's not going to work, and yours isn't going to work. And then there's kind of this yuck feeling because we've gone through all the answers, the easy answers, and none of them are really going to work. Now what? So now we can start really.
Right. Yeah. So, God, I just want to make this happen.
Well, yeah.
I'm maybe not a good interviewer because I'm a gym rough groupie.
Yeah, it's just, the secret isn't, it used to be for so many years, it would be people wanting to just look at me as somebody that's going to do this. Mm-hmm. Oh, he's working on it. He's been working on it for 30 years, blah, blah, blah. No, now we're at the place where 5 or 6 or 7 of us or something, still a small number, we're all standing shoulder to shoulder looking at the same mess and realizing, oh, this has to happen, and that's a new thing. I haven't had that yet. This is just brand new. So I don't know what that's going to bring, but I think it's going to, one thing, it gives me permission to get hit by a bus, or something, it isn't up to me anymore. Now other people see too, and it's a picture of how we can start thinking so that we can become intelligent and come up with something, some strategies, that make sense, that we're all behind.
I do think this is a difficult to hear solution because we're inside that form of thinking, which cannot consider these orders of solutions. Yes. But I also think more and more these things are dawning on people. And I think as a society, we're now realizing this isn't working and people are casting about for something. So I think things are changing. I think people are getting ready for it.
Yeah. What I try and do with people is you'll hear, whenever you talk to them, they'll hear the phrase, we need to. Mm-hmm. We need to educate everybody. We need to have everybody wake up and be we consciousness. We all have to have global consciousness of we need this, or we need to demonstrate in the streets so that people get it, or we need to on and on. There's all these we need tos, and I keep wanting to say, who's the we? Who's doing this? Who's doing this? And to me, there's like I have 5 we's that I talked about. One is we, just you and me talking right now. Okay. The other one is individuals. Everything's focused on the individual. If we can change all the people in the system, presumably we'll change the system. But no, of course, by definition, that doesn't happen because the system is independent of the elements in it. So, but everybody kind of thinks that if we get to global, if you do my meditation process or believe my Jesus or whatever, then somehow if everybody did that, then we'd have a tipping point and then the world would be different. I don't think so, because the system is untouched.
Right.
Another one is organizations, like, okay, well, we're going to, we're get our political action together, our social movement, or we're going to demonstrate how to do a, co-op movement or land trusts or something like that. We're going to demonstrate the new system, or, just our organization, our group, that we. And then there's the official the official decisions. Like we exited from the climate treaties, and then, now we're back in it again, the court. I mean, that wasn't everybody. It just was an official action that happened because the elected officials did it, So there's kind of the individual we, the organizational we, and the official we. And then, but the one we really need, if we add up all the brilliant, wonderful solutions to that with those as the actors, we 1, 2, 3, we're not there. We didn't get there. There has to be the people, we number 4, which we wave our arms around, but that has to happen. And you and I have a strategy for how that could actually happen. Right. As soon as that happens, then we can start taking action.
Yeah, this is why I love, it's instead of convincing anyone, we can facilitate it into being, essentially.
Yes.
Though we do need to convince one person with some money.
Some money, yeah. Exactly. And Gene always used to say to me, we just need one phone call. One person goes, oh, yeah, this has to happen. Get the call, and then off we go. But I also never thought it would be us doing it. I always thought some nonprofit would go, oh, yeah, this has to happen. And we got all these, we have a building of people here, and we wear ties and we go to work every day, and we know how to do this.
Yeah, I feel 100% committed, and these things are not things I have any skill with.
Yeah, okay, great. You and me both.
But I'm not going to be able to let this one go.
That's great.
And actually what I want is, I want to create that wisdom council in LA for climate. Climate is just my obsession. I can't, life doesn't make sense when life is falling apart.
Oh God, yes. And it's just one of the ways too. It's falling apart.
So I'm gonna figure it out with you.
Yes. Well, we need to stay in touch, and like I say, I'm going to come down. I think I'm going to extend my stay, so I'll be there like 3 nights, and try and awaken interest, or talk to people or something. I don't know how, but
yeah, I have a couple of contacts from Karina and Joanna that I'm trying to follow up with. Yeah, thanks, Jim. I don't know if anyone watched it, but this is it feels useful just talking.
I think so too. I think you and I can keep talking, and and just, I mean, there's all kinds of parts of this that need fleshing out that haven't been fleshed out yet, and especially the planning pieces, which I'm not that great at, but I think that the piece, I mean, I think it's all, we know it works because they've been doing this at large scale over there, and they're not doing it in the right way in my mind, because they do it within government, but it's still wonderful practice, and it's really showing good results. So
yeah, it's nice seeing how much confidence you have in it. And I think the other interesting part of the seminar I felt was, we all had these solutions like fire the government or have the government act wisely, blah, blah, blah. And like you said, it kept getting bigger. But then actually at the end of the day, I felt like every group just said, oh, we need to be doing this. Like, it was interesting because collectively, we didn't have a better thought.
Right.
even and everything we were working on, like the people working on homelessness in Port Townsend, everything they said was the solution to my climate problems.
Yes.
And
Yes.
at the end of it, they were all like, oh, we need to be doing this.
Yeah. Yeah. We have climate change and homelessness are direct results of our system.
Right.
They,
Right.
And so if you and I are talking about transforming the system, oh, well, that's kind of the key to dealing with all those problems. Now you can deal with them at the local level. Okay, everybody can run around and, build more houses, but the more houses you build, the more homelessness people you draw, really.
Right.
It's just, you can't deal with that problem at the local level. It's a systems problem.
Right.
And the same with climate change. It's like at some level, we have to deal with the fact that we have a system that's not structured for our situation.
Right. And was never designed to be.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself a systems thinker?
Well, I mean, not in the way that people talk about systems thinking, because they talk about it in this very specific design orientation way.
Mm.
But in terms of what I call the dynamical system, if you will, in other words, it's really about the process. What's the process? We have a little structure at the bottom, but it's a process of thinking, governance, economics, all of that comes, culture, truth, all of that arises from the simple structure, the rules of the game, kind of social contract of the box, or the king, leader, great leader type autocratic system of the triangle. And then what we're talking about is adding the one ongoing whole system choice creating conversation to whatever else is there. But all of a sudden that takes priority, that we're thinking now. We're thinking.
Right.
So to me, those are what I call dynamical systems. I don't know if it's the right word or not, but to me, it's like an underlying structure. And then there's a system that arises from that has all these components that, governments, economics, whatever, completely different. And so I'm just noticing that there's this, I don't have a design for the economy. I mean, somebody else is going to do that, I guess, but I'm just noticing that if we start thinking, well, we're pretty much in a new economic system already.
Right.
Because we're all now working toward some shared aim rather than maximizing profits and competing.
And that for me is what I want. Like, and that always at work was just where the magnificence of humanity comes out. Like,
yes.
It's that common goal brings out everyone's brilliance, I think. Right. And that coupled with crisis or a problem.
Yes.
And yeah. Yeah, and you can facilitate it into being. That's really what we need to do.
Yes. Yeah, and get some practice, get some practice with dynamic facilitation in different ways. Maybe just you and Piney, or in your community, or however it goes.
I definitely love to do this in business too. I think it's fascinating that you've been able to make these better solutions to things people aren't even thinking about because they're impossible. It's really amazing how reliable it is.
It is. And if you can, I would do the coaching with that too. I would always have a vertical chart in the room when you're coaching, and then if you're sharing a room, and then you can always step up and write and put it in that kind of matrix, and it's amazing how helpful it is to see. I don't understand why, but having it vertical is so important. it's it's so it allows people to, but you and me to both sit there and look at it together in some
Yeah. I
some
feel
way.
like you have the like, it definitely helps to see it. It helps me think better
Yeah,
as a facilitator. Just like, oh, I don't have to use my brain. I put it here and then I can see it and then I
yeah,
can use my brain. And
yeah,
I feel like well, I remember you saying that people come to this process and at the end of it are like, oh, how did we get there? And I feel like that's exactly the same with coaching. It's like
yeah,
you spend an hour talking to someone and then they're in a different place.
right,
And actually all of the detail about how you got there isn't important or isn't memorable maybe.
right,
Um,
right.
Apart from that story, like that story that you really want to share with people of how the thinking changed. Yeah.
Well, it's nice to be able to do that, to help people realize they made headway, because they can't really track it. You know, when you have a shift, you don't realize that you're a different person now, and you've got a different worldview, and it isn't evident. Like we had a gal stay in my Airbnb, and I said, "Geez, God, your name is so familiar. You know, like, did I, you know, I think we met. I think, in fact, I worked with you. You know, you something like that. Not sure how clear I was on that." She said, "No, it's not." Next day, she said, "Oh my God, yeah, we worked together. You changed my life." I went, you know, she she didn't
No, didn't even remember it was you. That's
didn't
yeah.
remember, yeah, until the next day because she didn't make the conclusion. I mean, she had forgotten how big a deal it was. She and her mother were in a conflict, blah blah blah, and so she ended up going to a different school, private school, and she moved away, and now she's very close to her mother, and but it um, but all that happened, and she had kind of forgotten it was something that she had taken charge of, and she made happen, you know, and and that it was her choosing and having a clarity that emerged, you know, in that process. So
Right.
anyway,
And
uh,
empowerment around it. Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, we all do that. We all forget these amazing leaps that happen. Uh, that this amazing difference that somebody, like for instance, I'm rereading Lila, the book by Robert Pirsig. And his first book was Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and a lot of
Oh
people
yeah, I've heard of
know
that
that.
one. Yeah.
It's a really good book. But his second book was called Lila, so which not many people read actually. But it was about, now that I'm aware that I know that it impacted me. So now I'm in this book group, and we're finishing here next week. But I realized that I had made these amazing leaps from reading that book. For instance, he's talking about dynamic quality versus static quality. And I named dynamic facilitation out of dynamic quality. But I had forgotten that that's where that came from. Now I'm rereading Lila, and it's all coming back to me. You know, it's like because the shift process, when you have a shift or breakthrough, you can't track. When you do it in a logical way, you can track your progress.
Right.
But
Right.
when the shifts happen, it's just, there's no place to step back unless you step back and think about it, you know?
Right. Yeah. I feel like that's true of just change in general. Like you can't track the moments of change. You just
Yeah,
lose yourself and then suddenly you're a different person.
yeah.
um,
So I think we all do that, but mostly our society keeps us in the thinking, trying to go logically
right.
through change, you know, manage change.
Right.
And no, we facilitate it, and it happens in bumps, you know, jumps.